The young and the restless spoilers shock in the early hush of morning. Victoria Newman awoke to a nagging disquiet she could neither name nor dismiss. Though the grand windows of her luxury penthouse revealed the familiar Galleria skyline, its glittering promise felt hollow, as though the world outside had somehow shifted just out of sync with the truths she once held dear. It began, she realized, with the slightest inconsistencies in Cole Howard's story. Small slips of detail that, at first glance, could be explained away as the fog of illness or the confusion of someone recently diagnosed. But Victoria, by trade and by temperament, was a relentless investigator of discrepancies. Her instincts, honed over decades of corporate warfare and family intrigue, had sounded an alarm when she compared the timeline of his supposed treatments to the sparse medical records he had provided. It gnawed her that the press release he'd authorized, so lyrical in its description of his bravery, so complete in its account of his battle with cancer, had no corroborating scans, no third-party confirmations, nothing but his word and her goodwill to stand on. A pinch of doubt had taken root, and she found herself unable to swallow assurances that once would have pacified her. Instead, she felt the old drive return, the need to know, to uncover, to control. By mid-morning, Victoria had made arrangements to subject Cole to the most comprehensive battery of diagnostic tests available at Newman Enterprises' private research facility. The suite itself was a marvel of cutting-edge equipment, tucked discreetly on the top floor of the company's medical wing. MRI machines with open architecture to reduce patient claustrophobia, arrays of blood analyzers capable of detecting even trace anomalies in cell structure, and real-time oncology panels that could confirm or refute the presence of malignant markers within hours. Though designed for genuine medical breakthroughs, this sterile cathedral of science would soon host a confrontation of wills, Victoria's unwavering demand for proof pitted against Cole's mounting panic. She stood outside the testing room, its double glass doors etched with the Newman crest, listening as his footsteps approached, each one sounding unsteady, hesitant. When the doors clicked open, she watched him step into the glare of overhead lights, his face pale beneath the carefully applied concealer, and realized that whatever lay ahead would strip away more than his privacy. It would challenge the foundation of the trust they had painstakingly built. "Cole," she said, voice low but firm, folding her arms across her tailored blazer, "I need you to submit to the full diagnostic panel. No exceptions." Her tone carried the weight of someone accustomed to command. He blinked back at her, eyes darting to the rows of gleaming stainless steel machinery, the bank of monitors silently standing guard over the truth. I don't have to do this," he stammered, voice wavering on the edge of hysteria. "You already know what's wrong with me." She shook her head, the motion precise and unyielding. "Tell me what you have to hide, Cole. If you truly have cancer, there will be nothing to fear. But if you refuse, then you confirm my greatest suspicion, that this illness is a lie." The words hung heavy in the sterile air like a guillotine's blade, and for a moment, Cole's composure cracked. Behind him, a team of technicians gathered folders and gloves, preparing to guide him through each procedure. When the first nurse stepped forward, Cole's panic ignited into desperate aggression. He shoved the aide roughly aside and bolted into the narrow corridor beyond. His patient gown fluttered behind him like a white flag of surrender he would never concede. Alarms shrilled through the facility as doors locked automatically, staff shouted warnings into intercoms, and security personnel raced to intercept. But Cole, as frightened by the promise of exposure as by the disease he claimed to bear, pounded through hallways and service tunnels, his bare feet slapping against linoleum floors, heart hammering like a war drum in his chest. He burst into the loading dock, scrambled over crates, and disappeared into the morning fog before anyone could close the net around him. In the silence that followed, Victoria stood alone in the testing suite's corridor, her finely manicured fingers curling into white-knuckled grips at her sides. The monitors blinked idle falsehoods, their screens filled with the promise of results that would never exist. Rage and relief warred within her chest, relief that the deception had revealed itself so starkly, and rage that she had been manipulated so cleverly. She turned on her heel and strode down the corridor, each footstep a declaration of war against the man who had dared to weaponize her compassion. By the time she reached the security office, the report was in. Cole Howard had vanished without leaving a trace, no phone calls, no emails, no messages for anyone in his circle. It was as if he had dissolved into the ether, taking with him every shred of credibility he once possessed. That evening, Victoria retreated to her private study, where the glow of city lights danced on her desk as she laid out every scrap of evidence she had collected. Medical correspondence, billing statements, his handwritten notes about symptoms that fluctuated too conveniently, and internal memos from her own legal team expressing concern about his opaque claims. She stared at Cole's photograph, taken months ago when he still wore his bravest smile, and felt a surge of betrayal sharper than any physical wound. In that moment, she resolved that she would not rest until Cole Howard was unmasked as the charlatan he was. Employing every resource at her disposal, from forensic accountants to private investigators and offshore contacts, she would reconstruct his entire life story, piece by piece, exposing each lie until nothing remained but the hollow shell of his invented illness. Meanwhile, the fallout of Cole's escape rippled through the halls of power in Genoa City. Board meetings convened in emergency sessions as Newman Enterprises executives scrambled to reassure shareholders that the company's rigorous due diligence protocols were still intact. Press releases went out under Victoria's name, measured, authoritative statements praising Cole's courage while subtly acknowledging that the company could not comment on private medical matters. Behind the scenes, the legal team prepared for the inevitable lawsuits. Defamation claims that Cole might file, counterclaims for breach of trust, and the prospect of criminal charges if his deception could be linked to financial gains or insurance fraud. Each scenario played out in Victoria's mind like a meticulous chess match, her strategic brilliance sharpening in the face of personal affront. And yet, late at night, when the penthouse was plunged into silence save for the hum of the climate control system, Victoria allowed herself a single moment of quiet reflection. She poured a glass of vodka, on the rocks, just the way she liked it, and stared out at the starlit expanse beyond the glass. The city's pulse, normally so reassuring in its constancy, felt distant. She realized that in unmasking Cole, she had also exposed a vulnerability within herself. The capacity to hope, to trust, and to be wounded by the betrayal of those she let into her inner circle. With a slow exhale, she steeled herself. Personal feelings would have no place in the campaign she was about to launch. Cole Howard had gambled with her goodwill, now he would learn the full force of her retribution. In the days that followed, Victoria's investigation accelerated. Private detectives traced Cole's last known purchases, examined security camera footage near the hospital's back entrances, and canvassed local service workers for sightings of a man in a patient gown acting erratically. Meanwhile, her corporate espionage unit intercepted phone records that hinted at secret rendezvous, the possibility that Cole had an accomplice waiting to whisk him away to some hidden retreat. Each lead was meticulously analyzed, every datum cross-referenced against social media posts, travel logs, and offshore bank transfers. Victoria herself sat in war room meetings, reviewing surveillance stills on 3 large monitors, isolating details in Cole's gait, the angle of his shoulders, the precise way he clutched the torn edges of his gown. Nothing escaped her attention, from the mud caked on the soles of his slippers to the faint scent of antiseptic that lingered on his jacket when he borrowed her clothes. As the noose of evidence tightened, Victoria reached out to those closest to Cole, friends, former colleagues, and even his ex-girlfriends, under the guise of concern, seeking anecdotes that might illuminate his secret past. One by one, they came forward with stories that seemed innocuous at first. A sudden leave of absence, an unexplained trip to an unnamed medical facility overseas, whispered rumors of a previous diagnosis that had never been confirmed. Piecing these fragments together like shards of broken glass, Victoria began to assemble a mosaic of deception so elaborate it defied disbelief. But she believed it, and her conviction fueled every action she took. Finally, after weeks of clandestine work, a breakthrough arrived. A single passport stamp from a Southeast Asian nation, dated 6 months before Cole's public announcement, linking him to a high-security clinic known for experimental treatments, none of which he had ever disclosed. The revelation was enough to secure a search warrant for his assets, bank accounts, and any property he might still own under a nominee's name. Victoria, poised and resolute, signed the affidavit herself, her signature a proclamation that no lie would remain unchallenged. And so, as dawn broke once more over Genoa City, Victoria Newman prepared to move the final piece on her board. The labyrinth of deceit spun by Cole Howard would soon be laid bare in court documents and headline news. She stood at the window of her study, watching the first rays of sun glint on the skyline where countless dramas played out in the lives of those who sought power, love, and redemption. Her glass of vodka sat half empty on the desk. A silent reminder that some truths demanded the courage to face them head-on, no matter the personal cost. In that moment of quiet triumph, Victoria allowed herself the smallest, most private of smiles. Cole Howard would learn, sooner rather than later, that in the game of vengeance and vindication, the stakes were always her own, and that the woman who wielded the Newman name would never be undone by a lie. Victoria stood at her balcony's edge, the cool night breeze tangling through her hair as the city lights of Genoa City shimmered below. In the weeks since Cole Howard had fled the private lab, her conviction had grown into certainty: he was a liar, a man who had weaponized her compassion for his own twisted purposes, and he no longer deserved a moment of her attention. She pressed a hand to the glass railing and exhaled slowly, the sting of betrayal still raw. Why had she ever allowed herself to believe his tale of illness, his carefully crafted vulnerability that had so cleverly hidden the truth? A bitter smile curved her lips as she realized something liberating: she didn't have to chase after him any longer. Let him hide in the shadows. Liars like him were beneath her concern, unworthy of the time and energy she would otherwise devote to the people who truly mattered. Her thoughts turned to the question that 100 sleepless nights had asked her: where was Cole now, and what grand plan had he concocted next? Had he hoped to return once the scandal faded, to reinsert himself into her life with a contrition too little, too late? Or had he simply vanished into obscurity, a ghost in his own falsehood? Victoria refused to indulge these questions in detail. Her life was too rich in genuine possibilities to be wasted on a man who had proven himself so undeserving. Yet a flicker of curiosity remained, a professional habit she could not entirely shrug off. She would commission a discreet inquiry, naturally. But she would not grovel for answers. If he wished to reveal himself, she would listen. If not, so be it. Her world would continue to revolve around truths she could build upon, rather than lies she would have to tear down. It was in that moment of resolve that her phone buzzed with an incoming message from Nick Newman, his name flashing on the screen. Even as she slid the phone open, her heart betrayed no lingering fondness for the man who had once held it, but rather a cautious warmth born of mutual respect and past alliances. Nick's text was brief: meeting at Society Cafe tomorrow, urgent discussion. She tapped back her agreement and tucked the phone away, her mind already shifting to the new agenda. Nick had always been someone she could rely on for a well-reasoned perspective, and if he considered their conversation urgent, she would make time. The Carter Foundation Gala for Nikki was still weeks away, and her calendar was studded with meetings to finalize every detail. But first things first, she would see Nick tomorrow and tie up any loose ends regarding Cole's disappearance. The next afternoon, Victoria found herself seated across from Nick in their favorite corner booth at the cafe, the ambient hum of patrons and the hiss of the espresso machine forming a familiar backdrop. She offered him a polite nod and waited as he unfolded a manila folder, the edges worn from use. "You wanted to talk about Cole," she prompted, keeping her tone neutral. Nick looked up, his gaze steady. "I got wind that he's resurfaced in Miami," he said quietly, sliding a dossier across the table. He booked a suite under an alias at the Coral Bay Hotel. Local security footage caught him on camera, same gait, same agitation. There's even a photograph of him at a diner. Victoria regarded the folder, flipping through passport stamps and transaction records. Miami. Of course. He would choose the flamboyant beaches over the hushed corridors of hospitals. But what did he intend to achieve there? She raised her eyes to Nick. And what's his plan, she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Nick folded his hands. It appears he's looking for someone, possibly an accomplice with medical credentials or offshore contacts who could help him perpetuate his scheme elsewhere. He thinks he can restart the lie somewhere distant from Newman Enterprises. Victoria felt a flush of anger. He underestimates me, she said, voice low but fierce. He thinks a few thousand miles will shield him from the consequences of his deception. But I have resources he cannot imagine, and allies who will ensure he has nowhere left to turn. Nick nodded. The question is, does he choose to face you and confess the truth, or does he keep running until he runs out of places to hide? Victoria tapped her glass thoughtfully. I'm a simple woman in this regard, she said after a moment. I don't need grand gestures or elaborate explanations. I only ask for honesty, plain, unembellished. If he truly has a reason, let him speak it. Otherwise, his lies are meaningless, and I will let them fall away like dust. As the late afternoon sun glazed the cafe windows in amber, they sat in companionable silence, each mulling the inevitable confrontation that lay ahead. Victoria rose and extended her hand. Thank you, Nick. I'll handle this from here. Nick reached across the table and squeezed her hand briefly, offering a reassuring smile. I know you will, he said. That evening, in the opulent Grand Salon of Newman Enterprises, Victoria convened a private meeting with her most trusted executives. The subject, a contingency plan for Cole's onward flight from the truth. Every detail was considered: legal injunctions, extradition treaties, discreet yet unyielding pressure on financial institutions to freeze his assets. Victoria's blue eyes gleamed with determination as she outlined each step, her voice calm but unassailable. We will give him the choice: return and confess, or face the full weight of the law and public scrutiny, she concluded. The room was filled with nods. This was the way of the Newman name, and no one did it better. After the meeting, she found herself alone in the lofty expanse of her office once more. The skyline had darkened to a tapestry of stars, and the only light came from the city's glow below. Victoria allowed herself a brief moment to savor the satisfaction of action taken, plans set in motion. Yet her thoughts would not be confined to Cole Howard. Tomorrow was the day she would discuss another matter close to her heart: the engagement of her niece, Claire, to Kyle Abbott, and the inevitable interference of Victor in their budding partnership. The following morning, Victoria met Claire in her sunlit living room at the ranch, where the rose-scented air hinted at the party planned to honor Nicky Newman. Claire, poised but anxious, had brought sketches of her meticulously crafted event proposal, menus, seating charts, floral arrangements. Yet the young woman's features tightened when Victoria greeted her. You look troubled, Victoria remarked, her insight honed by years of reading shifting expressions. Claire nodded, sliding her sketchbook onto the coffee table. It's Grandpa, she confessed. He's voiced objections to Kyle and me moving forward together. He thinks our alliance is too hasty, too dependent on emotion rather than strategy. Victoria settled into the armchair opposite her. Victor's protective nature can sometimes feel like an obstacle, she agreed. But remember, he's always valued careful planning, and nothing you've shown lacks rigor. In fact, I'm impressed by the way you've combined philanthropy with family legacy in your gala concept. A flicker of hope crossed Claire's face. You really think so? She asked. Victoria smiled. I do. But you need to present it to him in a way that appeals to his instincts, heart and head alike. She leaned forward, voice conspiratorial. At the Nicky Gala, you must take the stage early. Begin with a personal anecdote about Aunt Nicky's generosity, then unveil the charitable auction. Highlight how the proceeds will fund scholarships in her name. Make it clear that this is not just an event, but a strategic investment in the family's public image and philanthropic future. That will capture Victor's respect. Claire's tension eased, replaced by a newfound determination. I can do that, she said. And perhaps once he sees how much thought and care I've put into every detail, he'll withdraw his objections. Victoria nodded approvingly. That's the plan. Trust in your meticulous preparation, it's your strongest asset. After all, you're a Newman, and we are nothing if not masters of legacy. Later that day, as Victoria returned to her penthouse, she paused at the elevator, reflecting on the parallel paths she and Claire were navigating, one confronting a lie that threatened to undermine years of trust, the other forging a bond built on love and family unity. The irony was not lost on her. Yet as the doors slid open, she straightened her shoulders and smiled to herself. In Genoa City, every obstacle, be it a psychotic scheme by a scoundrel like Cole or a grandfather's wariness, could be overcome with a combination of honesty, strategy, and unshakable resolve.